All right. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can see me. I hope someone is there. Let's find out. Hey, Kale, how are you doing? Good morning to you and a happy Monday, I assume. Hey, Colton, how are you doing? Can you guys hear me? Let me see if I can hear myself. Still says waiting for me. I hope that is no longer the case. Oh, there we go. Yes, I can hear myself. I assume then Sue, you can you. How are you guys doing? Let's find out. Let's I don't know, start the evening. How was your weekend so far, guys? Hey Jeroen, how you doing? Wonderful. Let's get the day started. Cheers, everybody. Wonderful. As on Matt's pub, the same rule applies today. If you want to join me on screen, just let me know and I'll send you the invitation link on Discord, I guess. That sounds like the best way of doing this. Well, sounds good that you're off work. I mean, sick doesn't sound good, but I hope you're getting better soon, Kale. Hey, Britton, you want to come on screen? Let me know and I'll send you the link. So yeah, let's start. How was your weekend? What did you guys do over the weekend, and so forth? And what are you reading these days? I am currently, well, I reread The Pirates by what's his name, George MacDonald Fraser, and will start The Innkeeper's Song. I think I'll start The Innkeeper's Song tomorrow. We will see. By Peter S. Beagle. Finally got an audiobook. I'm very excited for that. I also have a bunch of books on what's his face? On Tammany Hall, the Battle of Blair Mountain, labor struggle, and so forth in the early 20th century in the US because of books that I've read last week. Nice. I hope it was a fun party. Now that would be really cool, Colton. Hey, Apollo, how you doing? Sort of like that, yes. Hey, biggest. So yeah, no, I read The Witch: A History of Fear from Ancient Times to the Present by Ronald Hutton, and he uses the word service magician to describe, what it totally makes sense, right? Service magicians are the people that provide all the kind of spells that you might want to go to if you want to, a spellcaster, you know, finding stuff, lifting curses, that kind of stuff. And he needs that thing to differentiate it from witches, which are in this specific version, which means someone who uses magic to harm other people. So service magicians are the others. And I'm like, service magician sounds really cool. It also sounds very much like urban fantasy, right? And from there, it was a small step to the union of the unionized service magicians and strikes and so forth. And yeah, that's how I got distracted again. Hey Bex, yeah, Paula, I was not necessarily planning to stream tonight. Usually, Matt on Books has what he calls a Sunday pub where everyone can just like hang out on screen or in chat and so forth. And that is not happening today because Matt was already streaming with other people earlier today, and I'm like, well, I've got nothing else to do. Clearly, I don't have a life, so let's do this. Okay. I have not read the ticket, but I'm glad it's good. Hello, Kadia. How are you doing? I hope you're enjoying Death of the Author so far, Apollo. And I'm sorry that the weekend was shit. No, I thought like Service Magician sounds really cool. So I had this vague idea about the Union of Service Magicians going on strike, and so the idea that I had, this is me doing my brain doing dumb things, right? So I recently read obviously the Power Broker by Robert Moses, which is a really good book, and you should read it if you haven't. And so it obviously talks a lot about corruption and so forth in the late 19th and early 20th century in New York, and now that's where kind of Tammany Hall comes in, which at the beginning was very anti-Irish and then turned into like a very much a pro-Irish thing for Irish immigrants and supporting them in a lot of ways. And in that book about witchcraft, it also talked about the Celtic version of like witchcraft, or why there was no large scale witch hunt in the Gaelic part of the Scottish Highlands or in Ireland, and that's because the connection to the attitude towards witchcraft was a different one, and that was tied to doing stuff for fairies, and fairies having all kinds of be all kinds of nice sort of like different names to mention that you're basically dealing with fairies and stuff like that. And my brain was like, you know what? You could have that whole like patronage system that you have with Tammany Hall, other political machines in New York. And since it's already the Irish, you can turn those organized crime people into basically fairies, or a fairy adjacent thing if you'd want to do urban fantasy, right? And the service magicians are obviously kind of beholden to them, the same way that, say, union workers in construction or so forth were often beholden to, the political and organized crime machine in a lot of ways. And then you can go from there and have the rich people that are slowly taking over the robber barons that are sitting outside of New York somewhere. You can have those kind of try to take over and destroy magic in a way, and that's where you have the labor conflict coinciding with magic, and that's where you get the Union of Service Magicians going on strike or something. And I haven't progressed any further, but that's what happened in my brain while I was supposed to do something else. So now you know how my brain works. Obviously, I haven't written that story, but that's what I was thinking about on Friday, and it's kind of not left my brain since then. Well, St. Bridget's Day. Okay, interesting. Well, I guess you can still get drunk, right? That sounds like an interesting game, Jin. And that's kind of the thing, right? Like witch hunting is a very specifically Protestant thing in a lot of ways, or a Roman thing, because apparently there were like two big witch hunts in ancient Rome. That's something I learned from reading that Ronald Hutton book. So yeah, now I know more about witches than I did before, which is it's always good to know more about witches, I guess. Hey Nexi, how are you doing? Yeah, well, you just said, and yeah, I understand that being in America is not necessarily a fun time right now. Are you just visiting to you in Europe, or are you moving over here because of America? And I assume you're going to Poland to visit family or something. Hopefully, the trip will be fun at least. No, that sounds like a very specific kind of witch there, Nexi, but it sounds cool. And yeah, so yes, I haven't written the story, but that's what I came up with, and I'm still somewhat enamored of the idea. Maybe I'll try to come up with more bits and pieces and write that, because clearly the other writing project is very slow at the moment. But I will hopefully, next week, a new history of the German Peasants' War comes out, and I'm going to read that, and I hope that will sort of like get my brain back into where I want to be with like the other writing project. Okay, sounds good. And yes, Britton, I've seen your message. I'll send you the link, and then you can join whenever you are back where you can actually stream. Hey, Phil and Skull. Ah, okay. Yeah, that makes that makes sense. Next, I hope it all works out well for you, because it's not the easiest time for anyone right now. I mean, German politics are kind of insane at the moment as well. So we have our elections coming up in 3 weeks. 3 weeks, I think, roughly 3 weeks, exactly 3 weeks. Now that I think about it, on the 23rd, I think is what I'm saying here. So yeah, and the Conservative Party has just decided to vote with the official right wing party, and during like something during a vote in Parliament, and that has made a lot of people mad. And I hope it may negatively affect at least the Conservative Party, because those guys are bad. As you know, voting with the fascists should have told everyone. Yeah, that's an understandable emotion, Nixie. I totally get that. And as I said, I hope it works out well. Kale, I have not yet voted, and I have not yet decided for whom to vote, because options are kind of shit, and that's the big problem right now. Technically, I mean, there's like basically there's 4 or 5 parties that will end up in Parliament, and those being the Conservative Party, the Social Democrats, the Green Party, the AfD, which is the fascist party, potentially the Liberal Party, although they have a good chance of not getting back in. And they used to be, I mean, the left wing party just called the left. The chances of getting into Parliament are unfortunately very small, or not unfortunately, but the general thing is that they are not the kind of left party that I wish we had. And then there is the BSV, which is sort of like a split off of the left party that I would not vote for, because while they claim to be left, they're also very nationalist in some forms, much closer to getting money from Putin, and being racist and anti-immigrant and all kinds of stuff. So not an option there. Like legitimately, if I want to give my voice to a party that I can at least sort of accept existing, that has a chance of ending up in Parliament, there's basically Social Democrats or Greens that I could vote for. Everything else is basically off the table at the moment, which is fucked up, because those are not necessarily parties I would, support at the moment either. But what can you do? Well, yes, anarchy is always something that I support. Yeah, I mean, see, as I said, like a good working left party would be good for Germany as well. But for all kinds of historical reasons, our left party is not exactly a good thing. It has some holdovers from the basically the state party of the GDR from socialist times, and it has some people that left the Social Democrats around, the early 2000s, when the Social Democrats went the same way that New Labour and a lot of like supposedly social democratic parties in Europe went full on neoliberal. And while that is understandable, it also had a lot of very personal power struggles and personal drama kind of behind that. And that mix has unfortunately kept the so called left party from moving forward into like anything that a left party should tackle today. There's a lot of like very old people there that are basically still stuck in the mindset of a very specific form of class warfare or class struggle that is still rooted very much in heavy industry and unions and stuff like that, and does not think about anything else. Which is why why they are willing to basically forgive everything that Russia does, because there's still that sort of like mid 20th century mindset going on in a lot of ways, and that's not where a progressive leftist party should be in the year 2025, which is rather sad that this has kind of held back the German party left for the last quarter century now. I would have to look it up how it was like for the last elections. I think youth turnout is relatively good in Germany usually. But here as well, like, I mean, the main group of voters are also like on the older side of things, which just because of like where the population is in general, and demographics being what they are, and that means that a lot of people vote somewhat conservative, and then you have like that massive sort of like imbalance between the former GDR and West Germany in a lot of ways, where when it comes to politics, that does also not really help. So the AfD will get a lot of votes, unfortunately, and the Conservatives will get a lot of votes because our government for the last 3 years was kind of fucked up because of the Liberal Party, who hopefully does not get back into parliament, because that party deserves to die a quick and, well, hopefully painful death. I have not read that one, Annexi. I've heard of it, but I haven't read it. There's a bunch of books like that I wanted to read. I keep forgetting someone else may have been Breaking Spines, who often hangs out in chat as well. Recommended it's called Flying Blind, which is the one about like how Boeing was basically destroyed by stock buybacks and all the other things that have made Boeing such a broken company over the last couple of years. There's stuff like that, and there's more like that I want to read, but it takes a while to get through everything. As I said, like I have just gotten a book, Machine Made, which is a biography of Tammany Hall and how Tammany Hall and stuff in New York was basically a precursor in a lot of ways, and they sort of like opened the way for for a lot of like progressive movements in 20th century America, all the way up to basically supporting FDR in a lot of ways, and so forth. And that's an interesting book that I'm going to read. Also going to finally read The Wretched of the Earth, which finally got an audiobook release. So I'm very happy. And I mean, obviously that's not a not a book that's going to make me very happy, but it's certainly something that I'm going to read. I feel in general like February sounds like a non-fiction month for me. Like there's no interesting fiction releases coming out that I have on my radar right now. March is when good new fiction comes out. Until then, I'm gonna, the second part of the Oliver Cromwell biography by Ronald Hutton comes out next week. That book on the Peasants' War comes out. Peasants' Uprising comes out. So yeah, lots of nonfiction this month, I think. But I'll look for the one for the Mindfuck one and see if it's available in audio or whatever, because yeah, it's definitely also like a thing that knowing can be helpful, I think. See, the thing with Cambridge Analytica is always where I'm not quite sure how big their impact actually was at the end of the day, but the fact that it was possible and people thought it was possible is already enough of a problem. So, no, we don't have mandatory voting. I think that's just a Belgian thing, or it's a Dutch thing as well. But like, no, Germany doesn't have mandatory voting. But turnout is usually somewhere in the, I think like 60-70% for the national elections, and then it kind of depends on what other elections, like European Parliament, the turnout is much lower, and for city, like mayoral elections and stuff like that, city parliament, then it kind of depends on where you are and so forth. I think it's called Flying Blind. I would have to double check that for the Boeing book next see. Hey, also. I think you're right. Leftist kids are definitely turning away from electoral politics. I just feel that like young voter, like people that can vote for the first time, a lot of them go and vote. I think the sort of like not voting and stepping away from it is more something that happens for people in the mid-20s, I guess, roughly. But it's certainly a problem. And yeah, I understand why leftist kids are not voting. It's like, who are you going to vote for? It's kind of hard. You have like mandatory voting, I think, is one of those weird things, really. I thought you get like sausages and shit when you go voting in Australia. I thought voting was cool in Australia and everyone got a sausage, which is, what in that case, I would go voting as well. I mean, obviously, I'll still go voting because, of course, I will. I think obviously the option is to go vote and just uh, what's it called? Mark your ballot as invalidate your ballot. That also gets counted to the larger percentage. So even if you don't want to vote for a specific party, voting and handing in an invalid ballot will at least put the numbers higher up, which gives the fascists less percentage than if you just don't even show up to vote. So that's like one way that a lot of some people I know usually go, is like they go voting and just invalidate the ballot. So Yeah, somehow I thought you might say that, Bex. No, I use the news usually if I have difficulty getting up. I usually read the news or something because then I get really angry and that drives up my blood pressure and then I'm awake. It's not necessarily a healthy way of doing that, but it works. Yeah, the sausage voting thing is just like really cool. Something that we all need, I think. Here's a button that says invite guests. I'm going to click that one for a moment because I'm using the thing. What's it called? I'm using Restream today and not StreamYard, so I have to figure out how to do the invitation thing first, so I can send it to Britain. Once again, if anyone else wants to come on screen, you can always just let me know. Up to 6 guests. All right. Copy. Okay. Now this is interesting. Apparently, I could set a checkbox here. I'm learning new things, which is, And apparently, there's an option so guests can add other channels. So I guess technically, if other booktubers, people with other YouTube channels would join, and I set that checkbox, y'all could also stream the same thing on your channel, which, pretty cool. Okay, I have done that, so at least this part has been solved, and we can continue. Sorry. Um, uh, I'll help you learn German. No worries. I think like learning German, and that's like one of the things. Like if someone seriously wants to move to Germany, I think like moving to like a large city like Berlin, say Frankfurt, Hamburg, possibly Munich, Cologne. If you're in like one of those large cities, in particular Berlin, right? You can get by with just English for a while and slowly learn German, depending on what kind of work or what kind of job you do. That's also possible just with English, I guess. So yeah. Oh, you're in a comic book store. What are you buying comics? Are you selling comics, or are you just browsing another comic selection? um, yeah, the Necronomicon one is just a channel thing that I guess will gets just used unless I put in like ex- an actual thumbnail, which I didn't do for this one. Yeah, I can understand that, Nexi. I totally understand that. Like learning, at least having some level of basic understanding of language makes a lot of sense. Um, Phil, so the Occupy movement. I mean, it kind of depends on which part you were looking at, right? I remember it being a thing. Obviously, living in Germany, most of the Occupy stuff happened in America. I think having read a whole bunch of David Graeber essays over the years, I have obviously come across a lot of like Occupy stuff and post-Occupy stuff of different, political action, direct action, and stuff like that that Graeber was involved in. And yeah, I mean, obviously it looked at different things over time, but it started out with the whole thing in Manhattan with Occupy Wall Street and often sort of like experimenting and just like trying to figure out different ways of living of building society or working as a sort of yeah in often in more anarchist ways around at least the David Graeber part of Occupy. That's sort of like what I remember of it, but obviously it's been a while. Central Europeans clearly like their meat. That is definitely true. I have never heard of that, Jeroen. That's although obviously the title Extinction is a very generic one. For a moment, I thought it was like the next part of that Jeff Vandermeer Area X kind of thing, the Southern Reach thing, because they all have these kind of titles. Uh, okay. For a second there, my audio was gone. I hope that was just for me and not for you as well. Internet is still running. Okay, weird, but yeah, I hope you can still hear and see me. That's true, Apollo. It's like I'm not used to talking to people like book-related people in German. I had it like a while ago. I was messaging someone else who I knew was German. Like, wow, I'm using German to speak to someone that I usually just interact in English with. I wonder why there's all those Sandman comics. Um, Yeah, that thumbnail, I try to remember who made it. I think so. I think it was a yeah, it's a friend who has done like artwork stuff for me before for all kinds of things, like t-shirt designs for the metal festival that I was organizing and stuff like that. Yeah. No, you don't want to hear me speak German, Bex. It's not that interesting. My German's not very good either, to be clear. No. That's like one of those things that at this point I sometimes, because I do interact so much online and do so much stuff in English with people from all over the world, that like sometimes I am sort of scrabbling for German words where I'm like, I know this word in English, I can't get it, figure out how to say that in German. So that's certainly a result of doing a lot of like the booktube stuff and other things where I'm just so locked into English at this moment that yeah. Frankfurt is well, it's very close to where I live. It's a large city. It is fairly dirty. It's a very unfriendly city in a lot of ways. It's not a very hospitable city, is how I would describe it. And you obviously have the banking sector, of course, which is fairly clean and all of that stuff. But if you leave that, it's a very um, fairly rough city in that regard, I would argue. So like no like really cool inner city with pedestrian areas. There's very little old old city. Like obviously in Germany you have a lot of like nice old cities with like lots of historic buildings and stuff like that. You don't have that much of it in Frankfurt. Obviously you have a bunch of really cool museums and stuff like that. Both the one like high art museum is really good, and the dinosaur museum is really cool. Or maybe that's just like because I was there as a kid a lot because I grew up near Frankfurt and I could I could go and see dinosaurs a lot. Fuck. Oh, so I'm sorry to hear that. That's brutal. Dresden is very beautiful, as long as you ignore the politics. And the reason it is beautiful is kind of that I mean, obviously, it was bombed all to hell during World War II, but they did rebuild it in an almost like almost romanticized version of what it looked before. So it looks very clean and beautiful in that regard, because yes, it was all like built up again with a lot of money afterwards. And whereas a lot of other German cities that got bombed just like built something serviceable at the time and did not try to recreate sort of like the pre-war thing. So that's why Dresden is the kind of city it is. Yeah, yeah, I agree with that, Apollo. It is, yeah, it doesn't feel international, even though you have like all the European Central Bank and all this other like high finance shit there. It does have like Germany's biggest airport though. That's a very that's a huge thing. Bremen is very nice. Hanover, I don't know. Hanover is just like one of those weird cities that just feels like Hanover feels much smaller than it actually is, in that it is so dead. Yeah, the Christmas market in Dresden is obviously a wonderful thing. That's true. Yeah, I can see that Highway Cavalier. Like I've been to Munich before. Um, Munich feels slower as a city because it has all these huge like broad streets, very broad sort of like pedestrian. It's very walkable in a way that Berlin is not necessarily. I think it feels more spacious, more open in that way. Munich, that is. Kale, I don't get a lot of arcs. I have gotten emails from a group, like a number of self-published authors, and I have gotten one email from Saga Press. They were offering a romantasy book to me as an arc, and I did not reply because But I also don't use NetGalley and haven't applied and haven't asked for our arcs either. So I usually wait for books to come out and then buy them myself. So I don't feel beholden to anyone for to talk about a book in a way. It is certainly the most expensive city in Germany, Munich, that is. But Munich can be posh, but Munich can also be cool depending on where you are. It's a large, it's a large ass city. I mean, for German standards, right? Yeah, I can see why you would do that. Would want that biggest. That totally makes sense. I mean, I've been to Hamburg before. It's usually been very destructive when I was in Hamburg with friends, but that's probably more like a situation because of me and my friends. And beyond that, Hamburg is a nice city. Sorry to hear that, Apollo, but yeah, I hope it does not, stay a problem for longer. So yeah, no arcs for me, but that's because I don't ask for them. Uh, Biggest is just a huge Beatles fan, and that's why he wants to go to Hamburg in the '60s. Well, a Wiener Schnitzel or a Vienna Schnitzel is, of course, an Austrian thing. Drinking at museums is something that I have done before. And that was in the history museum or the museum of the city, the history of the city of Sofia. So in Sofia, I have drunk in at least one museum numerous times, even at midnight, for reasons. No, Germany does not sell weed in public that way. We have legalized weed since last April, and what that means is that you are allowed to grow your own, and there's like one sort of like other way of buying weed, which is you join like a specific like association, and then you can get up to X amount of weed per month or something like that. That's the way. So you don't have the open air coffee shops that you have in the Netherlands. No, you can't drink at museums in Germany next year, not officially. I mean, obviously, if the museum has like a museum coffee shop, then you can usually drink beer at the museum coffee shop. But obviously, you're not allowed to drink in museums in Germany. That was because I have friends in Bulgaria and they work at the museum, so that's why we could sit in the museum at midnight and drink beer. That is not something you are allowed to do in Bulgaria either. Just to be sure, just to be clear, that's not something you can just do. Yes, Sofia in Bulgaria. Wonderful city. Hey, Alicia, how are you doing? Yeah, museums can be really cool, especially when they're like really well done museums. Like I think like one of the best designed modern museums I've been to is the Museum for Jewish History in Warsaw. That is an impressive museum. That's just like really well done. The way it engages the audience, visitors, and so forth. It's just really really good. So if you ever go to Warsaw, check out that specific museum. Oh, and check out the archaeological museum in Warsaw because it has a lot of like cool stuff from that one Coptic church that got uh, well, obviously it got taken down and shipped partly to Warsaw when they built the Aswan Dam, and that whole valley was flooded. So they took that very very old, it's like fourth century or something, super old Coptic church, which has all these creepy angels with eyes on their wings and stuff like that. Back when they still painted angels the way they are described in the book. Yes, they do have. They have a lot of like Roman history stuff in Bulgaria. Obviously, the whole like old Serdica, which is the Roman part of Sofia. What's really cool is that when they built the metro there, they obviously had to dig through Roman ruins, and they have sort of integrated part of the stuff they excavated at the time of the excavation. They have integrated that into some of the subway stops. So you're down in the metro, and part of the platforms has like integrated some of the stuff they dug up from when they were excavating that part. I have been to Poland several times. I was there last year. I was in Łódź in last October for a conference. I've been to Warsaw for a conference, and I have been to Poznan a couple of times. I've been to Wrocław. That's all of the Polish part, and that part, that town that is directly on the other side of the Oder of Frankfurt, the East German Frankfurt, not the West German Frankfurt. I've been there because um, an ex-partner of mine lived in Frankfurt, Oder, and was actually Polish. So that's how I ended up going to Poland a bunch of times. Yeah, exactly that one, Nexi. But it's really cool in Łódź they have a film museum because Łódź was the capital, or the one city in Poland, in communist Poland, where the entire film production was located, and they have like a really cool film museum there because the film academy is also in Łódź, and they did the old Moomins show in the whenever that was, like 70s or 80s. That was done in Łódź in at the time because Walt Disney wanted to do a Moomins show, and Tove Jansson, being the really really cool person that she was, said like, "Nah, I'm not going to sell this to Disney. They're going to fuck up the Moomins. They don't get the anarchism in my in my cartoons. I'm going to give that to a socialist company in Poland to do that." So that's at the film museum you see a lot of like the original stuff from the Moomins production. So that was really cool. I have not been to Krakow yet. Yes, no, it's a different one. It's a very small one next to Frankfurt Oder. You can just like walk across the river bridge there, and And you can start drinking on the street on the German side. And once you're over in Poland, it's obviously forbidden because Poland does not want people to drink alcohol in public, which is why I totally did not drink beer on the tram in Warsaw. The Moomin books are also absolutely brilliant. I've been thinking about maybe doing like a Moomin reread and making videos on the Moomins. That might be something for next year or like for 2025. The sort of like the winter reading thing, making it Moomin Mass or something. That might be a cool thing. I said Moomins. Yes, Nexi. Yeah, I know everyone does it, but officially, it's officially drinking, public drinking on the streets is not allowed in Poland. It's also not allowed in Croatia, for example, but there also everyone does it, so it's a thing. I think it kind of depends on where you are and whether the cops just really want to fuck with you because they obviously can. The same way that it's apparently highly illegal to jaywalk in Poland in a way that obviously it's not, or you can get into trouble for jaywalking in Poland in a way that you cannot necessarily in Germany. Yeah, like the movements are just like seriously really cool stories, and I wanted to read the one adult novel that Tove Jansson wrote. That's something I want to try. Seriously, like her biography is also just like super fucking impressive in general what she did and how she, got into trouble for drawing very angry Hitler cartoons in the 40s and stuff like that, and was living in a lesbian relationship when that was still illegal in Finland, and all kinds of crazy shit. Like really, really cool person. Seriously cool person. Nah, I mean, yes and no, Jin. From what I can tell, it seriously depends on where you are, and yes, of course, if you're a jerk, but even if you're not a jerk, if cops want to fuck with you, then they can do that for drinking and jaywalking in a way that, obviously, drinking in public is just very normal in Germany, where like everyone can just like walk on the streets and drink beer. Yeah, so I've heard, Daniel. I remember that was like fun when I was on tour with a band and they were here for the first time in Europe in general, and they're like, wait, we can actually drink while we're in the van because apparently that's also not necessarily legal in the US when you're riding shotgun or when you're just like a passenger in a car, you're not allowed to drink alcohol, which I found really fascinating. And they were like, "Wait, we can drink while we're on the tour van. We can totally do this." So yeah, like the culture around alcohol, in particular, obviously beer and wine, is very very how can I say this very liberal and laid back in Germany. Alcohol is just like very much integrated into everyday life in a way. Like um, I think I've said that before. It's like it's very normal for people, depending on where you are, of course, and what kind of job. Like it's very normal for people to go that are working go on and have a beer at lunch on the lunch break, or have maybe even two beers, and then go back and just just go back to operating heavy machinery, worst case. And that is just something that is sort of like built into German culture in a lot of ways. And I think that leads to Germany having a lot of like low key functioning alcoholics, because so many people just have like two, three beers every day, and that's clearly not healthy. um, but because so much of the drinking, at least in that regard, the casual drinking is more leans towards beer and wine and not strong alcohol, it kind of leads to a different form of drinking, like general drinking behavior. You can always see that when you're at a festival or something and you have a lot of people from Scandinavia come over. And if you live in Norway, obviously, alcohol is really really expensive. So people from Norway, Finland, Sweden, they usually drink a lot of like very strong alcohol, because if you spend money on alcohol, you might as well get something that actually works fast or whatever. When they come to Germany, then obviously they find out that beer is incredibly cheap here, and if you come with, you know, uh, a Norwegian kronen, krona, then you can totally get hammered for basically nothing. And drinking beer is different from drinking other forms of alcohol because through the hops in beer, there's a products in there that kind of are in the same family as the stuff that's as weed, and sort of like a similar family, which is why drinking beer has often like a more mellowing effect compared to say drinking vodka in a way, right? Because there are additional sort of like cannabinol kind of things in there, which also means that if you're not used to it and haven't drunk a lot of beer, but have only drunk other alcohol, then these things will obviously affect you much more because you're not used to the fact that beer is not just alcohol in a lot of ways. So you get a lot of people that can totally drink you under the table with vodka or anything like that. Totally get very much wasted when they like wasted quickly when they drink beer. Yeah, Finnish is a very unique language. Obviously, it's kind of similar to Hungarian, I think. But those are such demonic languages that I have like no understanding of either one. The comet, the comet in Moomin Valley is a very dark one, and you can tell that's a book that was written during the Cold War with the idea of like nuclear war being something that was in everyone's mind. Hey, Da, what did you miss? General talk about drinking in museums and cool museums and stuff like that, and why the movements are really cool. That's roughly what I remember, and why German politics suck. Drive-through liquor stores sound like a really cool invention. Not gonna lie. Yeah, yeah, very much that, Nexi. You have a leprechaun museum in Dublin. Wait. Do you have like what's on display in the leprechaun museum? Or do I really would I regret the answer? Yeah, that sounds weird. The drive-through bar, I guess, in that regard. But that's like one of those things, right? Like beer in Germany is not taxed like other alcohol, but it is taxed like general like essential foodstuffs in a lot of ways. So beer is just very, very cheap here. Let me check something. Okay, I was just checking if someone was trying to actually join the stream, and I had just like ignored them for the last however long. But either no one has, or Restream is angry with me and doesn't show. Phil, I know very little about Rastafari and the entire culture. I just know it exists, and anything beyond that, I know basically nothing about beyond what gets mentioned in Marlon James's A Brief History of Seven Killings. I know that is bad. I should know more, but uh, yeah. Yeah, that was what I was expecting. Biggest. Um, so yeah, I guess if I ever come to Dublin, I will check out the Leprechaun Museum. That sounds like something to be seen. I don't think there are Becks, although it may sound that way because I have a brutal lisp. And the knocked out tooth doesn't help with it either, which hopefully will be gone very soon. I mean, I have an appointment with a dentist, or like a dental surgeon, whatever you want to call those people, to remove the root on Friday, and then I'll get like a sort of like provisory thing in there, and then after a while I'll get like a full like dental implant or something else to make me look less like a hobo or pirate. We'll see. But it hopefully it won't last much longer, and I can finally get back to doing the fucking Mormonism video. Yeah, that's because I really want to get back to the Mormonism thing. I want to get it over with, and yeah, I feel that with a topic like that is possibly gonna maybe get viewers that haven't watched anything by me before and don't know me as a person and so forth. If I still look like this with the knocked out tooth, I'm very conscious about that. That might just undermine whatever I'm saying, because clearly I'm not to be trusted if I look like this. And a lot of the way we judge authority on YouTube, I think, comes down to production values. Of course, on the one hand, sound, the way we speak. If you have like a deep voice and you speak more announce properly and speak in a slower cadence and so forth, people will take you more seriously and so forth. And I'm not good at any of that. But when I talk about like the history of a specific religion, possibly mentioning stuff that said religion doesn't necessarily want to have spread and so forth, I want to sort of like have my shit in order and give potential critics as few openings as possible, in a way. Oh, you mean, yeah, the is it the something in Scarlet, right? That's the first Sherlock with the Mormon um, uh, women hunters. It's yeah. Yeah, I was even thinking about getting like if I could afford like a gold tooth, it would totally work really well. And yeah, it's just like you never notice how important sort of like your teeth are for all kinds of things until you have one less, and suddenly speaking is different. And well, eating of course as well, but like speaking is super different because it turns out you sometimes need your teeth for that. Exactly, Phil. Exactly. Study in Scarlet, right? That's the one. And that's like an interesting thing, because the idea of lecherous Mormon men abducting and otherwise luring young women into their hands, that was a very specific like trope in a lot of like serialized fiction, penny dreadfuls and so forth in the mid 19th century. So that is definitely something, a cliche that never was like actually real, essentially. But it certainly was big in both British and American fiction, and that's why uh, what's his face chose it for the first Sherlock Holmes story. Doyle, that's his name, Arthur Conan Doyle. I have not gotten Scientology ads yet. I just get like the Shen Yun stuff. So I guess that's basically the same, but also with anti-communist. Although LRH also was an anti-communist, so I guess there's no difference between Scientology and Shen Yun after all. See, that was super fascinating. Like a while ago, I used a VPN to access a website full of academic books that for at the moment was blocked in Germany. And suddenly I get everything in Dutch, and I got very different ads on YouTube and everything from what I get when I am supposed to be in Germany. So that was interesting to see what everyone in the Netherlands has to put up with at the moment. Yeah, yeah. After 14 years next year, yeah, that's a long time. So now the thing with like Mormons and Mormonism growing incredibly fast, especially in Britain in the late 1830s and early 1840s and 50s and so forth, is very much tied to the Industrial Revolution because at the time Mormons were obviously encouraging their converts to move to the States and, well, at the beginning to move to Kirtland and, of course, to Missouri, to Independence, Missouri, which is where they supposedly wanted to build Zion, and then later to Nauvoo in Illinois, and then obviously finally to Utah. So if you have like cities and all the stuff that comes with like an industrial revolution in the first half of the 19th century in Britain, and everyone sitting in those wading knee deep through coal dust to their work in the coal dust factory, and so forth, and you have missionaries coming over and going like, look, here's this new religion that really looks after each other, and if you come to us over there, you get a farm. You can live in the wide open land. You don't have to, walk through knee-deep coal dust every morning because that's not happening in fucking Utah at the moment. That's a very attractive proposition in a lot of ways for a lot of uh, mostly lower class people in Britain in the mid 19th century. So a lot of people moved over, and that's where that skepticism towards Mormons or the idea that Mormons were using some devious tactics to get young women or women in general and so forth to convert to their religion and come to their place. But that's more like a side effect of all kinds of other things. Well, yeah, you can tell I've read like 20 something books on the history of Mormonism by now. But yeah, it's super interesting to see where that comes from and what sort of like ideas sort of drive a religion early on. You have like especially like the 1820s and 1830s, upstate New York, the famous burnt over district is a really the second great awakening in the US is just a fascinating time, right? You have like spiritualism starts there, the Seventh-day Adventists start there, there's a lot of Quakers and stuff happening in upstate New York at the time. And Mormonism also comes from that sort of like hotbed of people redefining and trying to find new ways to sort of position themselves versus possibly God or the universe in a lot of ways. You have a lot of different things happening at that time in that very specific sort of like region around upstate New York mostly. It's a super interesting time. Lots of really weird cults too. I mean, the Mormons are still one of the of the most mainstream ones coming out of that time and place. So that says a lot. It's really interesting what kind of different small cults with prophets and prophetesses they have. There is what's her name, Jemima Wilkinson is leads a specific congregation, and supposedly um she could also walk over water, and when people wanted told her that she shouldn't, no, no, I don't feel like doing it today, and just like never did it. Yeah, it's a really fun sort of history, and early Mormon history in general is just super fucking action packed all the time. It's so funny, like the Kirtland banking society, anti-banking society is just like one of those pretty fun bits as well. It's like, so obviously you don't have a central bank in like the 1830s because what's his face, Andrew Jackson has abolished that, and then so you have all kinds of smaller banks that all hand out their own money, right? And the Mormons start their own, or want to start their own, in Kirtland, Ohio, and they don't get a banking license for it because at the time the first couple of banks have started to collapse. So the Ohio uh, governor and the state parliament are somewhat wary and going like, no, we don't need another somewhat unstable bank here, so they don't get a banking license. So what they do is go call the thing an anti-banking society, anti-banking society, because clearly, if you say anti-bank, it's not a bank, and you don't need a banking license for that. And that's how they start. And the bank does collapse finally. And the fun bit is because obviously people are constantly questioning the liquidity and the stability of all the banks at that time, right? It's not just the Mormon bank. They keep questioning that. So what you got, if you asked, you were put, led into the cellar of the Kirtland Anti-Banking Society, and they had all these huge boxes that had the amount of money stored in them written on the outside, and you could even they open the box and you can see that it's stuck full of silver coins. Turns out they were filled with sand, and just like the top layer was silver coins. And it's just so much fun. You read early Mormon history and you're like, holy shit, this is how this religion started. Makes you wonder how early Christianity was, and how chaotic, disorganized, and just weird that must have been. Um, well, Nexi, I think partly America is like that because you've got a lot of religious outsiders moving there, sometimes forcefully and sometimes willingly, right? You have like all the Puritans, well, you shouldn't call them Puritans because that was a slur at the time. The dissenters and so forth, all the radicals that after Oliver Cromwell's death and after during the Restoration, a lot of them moved to America, because there you could still be a dissenter, didn't have to go become part of the Anglican High Church, which all the way until the Glorious Revolution and the Toleration Act and so forth. If you lived in the UK, you had to be a member of the Anglican High Church, unless faced like very serious restrictions on what you could do and so forth. So a lot of those people end up in America, and they're already all the different weird radical Protestant sects. So they end up there. And then you obviously add a lot of people from other religions. You have a lot of Dutch people coming over, which are also religious dissenters. You have Swedish people that often also are part of that. So you have like a lot of different people that bring their religious grievances from Europe specifically to a place where they can be themselves and don't have to adhere to any like state rules on religion, because obviously England has the Anglican Church. In the German parts, you had at the time the whole like idea that after the Protestant Reformation and after the 30 Years' War, you have that situation that each state has the religion of its ruler. So if you are a Protestant and you're duke, king, count, whatever your region you live in decides to become Catholic, you suddenly have to become Catholic. And in a time where religion is something that people take incredibly seriously in a way that a lot of us don't anymore today, that's a big deal. And suddenly moving to a country where you can just believe whatever the fuck you want is really tempting. That's why, for example, the Anabaptists, the Mennonites, obviously nowadays, ended up in the U.S. because Anabaptists were not exactly very welcome in Germany after that whole Munster debacle, which really fun, not really fun, but very interesting episode. If you ever want to read something really gruesome, including cannibalism and all kinds of insanity, look at the Anabaptist realm in Münster in Germany. That's weird shit. I think it was sort of. It depends with the tensions. I think in the beginning, I think there was just enough place, enough room to not do that. Right. That's like one of those things, right? Penn, for example. What's his name? William. I think William was the one after whom Pennsylvania is named. Right. He was a dissenter, and he just which is why you have around Philadelphia, you have used to have a lot of very specific forms of the groups of dissenters hanging out there and moving from there further on. I think the religious tensions start coming more in the 19th century with the influx of also more people from Eastern Europe, a lot of Catholics moving in, Orthodox moving in. That's kind of when you have more of that. When you begin having that also more in cities, right, where people are starting to actually push up against each other, push up against each other. That's sort of when the religious strife kind of starts happening. Yeah, Nexi, the Anabaptist rebellion in Münster is insane. They basically took over the city of Münster, and the local archbishop and army besieged the town for months, I think, at the time. And the Anabaptists inside the city basically created their own weird Anabaptist sort of steady. We're basically waiting for the second coming of Jesus, and holy shit, that got really wild. All possible trigger warnings apply to that one. Yeah, Johnny Appleseed is another one of them. I'm sure the Anabaptist thing was one inspiration for Stephen Erickson for the Memories of Ice thing. Yes, that would definitely fit. It's like the thing, right? That history is just full of insane things, and if you are a fantasy author, you're kind of hard put to coming up with stuff that is more wild than some of the stuff that humans have already gotten up to over the years. So sorry, just checked again if I am missing someone who's trying to get into the stream. Yeah. Yeah, as you can tell, I am reading the wrong books and way too many of them, and it's very easy for me to get sidetracked into weird bits and pieces about religious history. If you want an interesting sort of historical fiction on parts of that, I think the Baroque cycle by Neil Stevenson is is a good look into that, because it covers parts of the 17th century and the early 18th century, including the Glorious Revolution, the Restoration, stuff like that. It also has Isaac Newton in it, and Leibniz in it, and other people that are somewhat famous, and so forth, and it looks at like a lot of the dissenter dynamics in that. You're right there, Jen. Like, reality doesn't give a damn about being coherent. That is unfortunately true. Yes, the temperance movement is part of that, which is so interesting because the temperance movement, especially in the mid 19th century, was also tied to, for a while at least, to the women's suffrage movement in a lot of ways. So you have these weird intersections. Which also then tried to link with Mormons, because the women's suffrage movement thought that Mormon plural marriage was obviously something terrible, and if women only would get the vote, they would obviously vote against plural marriage, and that's why they supported women's suffrage in Utah. And Utah was, in fact, the second state in the United States that did, in fact, enfranchise women and give women the right to vote. And it was the first where women are actually able to vote, because the other one had elections slightly later. And I keep forgetting which one the other state was, the first one was. But yes, Utah was the first state in the US where women were allowed to vote. And surprisingly, Mormon women did not want to not vote to abolish plural marriage at the time. So it's all weird. History is weird, but that's kind of what makes history so fun in a lot of ways. I mean, that's like the other part, right? Like prohibition being a progressive cause at the time, at least for some progressives. You have this weird idea that a lot of ideas that were deemed progressive at the time, especially like the late 19th, early 20th century, sound incredibly weird today, right? Things like eugenics in a lot of ways. And you read something like Charlotte Perkins Gilman's story, The Crux, which is, on the one hand, a very feminist story about two women deciding, or three women deciding, to move further out west and open a boarding house, basically, and just do the whole thing, because Eastern society and its expectations for single women and so forth does not actually work well for them. So they decide to move over there, which is, on the one hand, like a really cool, emancipatory feminist story. But it then also talks about the need for strong women to have strong babies for a future, and suddenly it gets very, very close to your 14 words in holy shit at the same time, which is just hard to read today when you go like, I thought this was like, really progressive and good. At the same time, you're talking suddenly about like keeping the race pure. What the fuck's going on there? And yes, George R. Martin has said that the War of the Roses is something that influenced A Song of Ice and Fire. It's like the thing that, and the War of the Roses heavily influenced Arthurian fiction, in that the big one that everyone was sort of like the standard Arthur story, the Le Morte d'Arthur, d'Arthur, was written at the tail end of the War of the Roses, and hence a lot of the sort of like inner sort of like discourse of Le Morte d'Arthur is about the falling apart of Arthur's rule and dissents and civil war, basically, because of all kinds of reasons, and that's heavily because of England just having lived through something where like a very stable monarchy completely wrecked itself and the country around it. Well, but then again, the guy who wrote down Thomas Mallory, who did write Le Morte d'Arthur, wrote it in prison. And if you were wondering why he was in prison, it's because he was an actual fucking robber baron. He he kidnapped some fellow noblemen and ransomed them and shit. It's like just like really, really fun bits and pieces there. Hey Joe, how are you doing? Yes, I am very happy that I can help you procrastinate. So the Arthurian legends are a weird mix of things, Nexi. In that you have some bits and pieces of Arthur showing up in a couple of saints legends where he's more like sort of like a trickster that gets placated by a saint in some way or form, and then he shows up in a poem somewhere, and he shows up in an early historiographical text where he's mentioned, and then all of that gets combined by Geoffrey of Monmouth in his History of the Kings of England, where he gets like a full-on biography, and that is completely fictional. Geoffrey of Monmouth invented Merlin and adds all of that stuff around Arthur, and then from there on you get different Arthurian stories happening, and yeah, you get different stories added. You have the French corpus of Lancelot and the Grail stuff being sort of like all of these bits and pieces, depending on what people are trying to tell, are sort of like added onto this large mess of different Arthurian stories. And then all of that gets kind of collected and reorganized by Mallory in the late 15th century. And from there on, it stays relatively the same until the 19th century when the Romantic era sort of like Victorianizes Arthur in a lot of ways, and then the 20th century obviously does whatever the fuck people want to do with Arthur. So that's the short version. I on Arthurian literature. It's unfortunately not very complete. By which I mean it's only 4 hours long and leaves out a lot of detail. Tita La Vie Tidar does very much get Merlin right in a lot of ways. See, what I found really interesting when I recently read Wizard of the Pigeons by Megan Lindholm, which is a really good book. I really enjoyed it. And there you have the idea that wizards are real, but wizards need something to make them basically turn wizard. And what with Wizard of the Pigeons being set in like early 80s Seattle, that's obviously surviving the Vietnam War. And that's a lot of people that came back. So basically, PTSD is what turned people into wizards in that specific book. And, that's just interesting because what it is basically the same thing that Brandon Sanderson did in Mistborn when he has the idea that if you are a Mistborn or have like allomantic abilities, you need to snap, break, whatever you call it. I think he calls it snapping, right? Which is usually if something traumatic happens, right? If someone beats you, you falls down, something like that, and Sanderson, being a very mechanics oriented dude, just describes it like that. It's like, yeah, obviously something traumatic has to happen, so we just beat our children until they turn wizard, basically. Whereas Megan Lindholm, being not very mechanics oriented as a person, writes a story about stepping outside of society and dealing with PTSD and surviving a harrowing experience. But basically, both use the same idea that a traumatic experience changes us enough to become wizards. Okay. Britain is here. Let me find out how to add you. Sorry, this takes a moment. I need to focus on my screen reader for a bit here. Let me find out how to do that. No, I don't need a new link. I need a Britain. There's a, what's it called? Toggle source. I've clicked that. Let's find out what's happening. Okay, now you can witness in, well, live how I'm failing at doing the live stream thing. How does that work? There's a button that says remove. I'd rather not click that one. Portrait. Showtime. I wish this shit was easier to do. Closed, huh? Okay. I guess we're getting there. Here we have you, Britain. Add to the stream. There you are.
Hello.
I can hear you, Britain. I hope everyone else can hear you and see you now as well. This is
Check, check. Hello, everyone. I can hear you, Raf. Can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you, Britain. Welcome to the stream. Sorry this has taken so long. I'm using Restream and I haven't used it before with like more than just me streaming, so I had to figure out how to do that.
All good, man. Glad to be here. I'm just got back from church, just chilling. It's a very quiet Sunday afternoon out here in Oklahoma. It's probably, actually.
Yeah. So, what are you reading at the moment, Britain? And how was your week?
It was pretty busy actually this week. I did a lot of things. I'm a moderator now on the
Ooh.
Talking Story Discord, so
Nice.
that was pretty tight. I read a little more of Yiddish Policeman's Union, which I'm
Cool.
slowly making way on that. And last night I started If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin, which is pretty good so far.
That sounds like a good book indeed.
It's a very angry, compassionate book. I think you would like it, Raf.
I'm sure I would.
I'm also reading Superman for All Seasons by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, which is considered a pretty good Superman story. I'm reading some Superman comics before the new movie comes out. So
I see.
Hopefully that'll go well.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so for your sake. I am, of course, not reading comics. I just reread The Pirates by George MacDonald Fraser, which has some really interesting bits and pieces in it. Also, some horrendous language that you can't get away with today.
I kind of just realize that's a given in a lot of books, movies from like
This is from like 1983, and
oh well.
Now the thing is, I think more like what is going on is, and that's certainly something I'm going to talk about when I make the video for it. it does parody or a satire, and it does so by exaggerating things. And if you want to satirize the inherent sort of like racism in a lot of like pirate movies of the 1950s, and you do that by exaggerating the racism, you kind of start using language that can make people very, very uncomfortable indeed.
You know, I actually watched your video yesterday, and I was kind of thinking about it, and I'm like, well, Raph, you know, I mean, to play devil's advocate, you know, like when do you think like a book um is merely depicting things like racism and sexism without, you know, saying it's bad or good, aside from books that have racism and it's just kind of accepted as okay? Because I kind of, I'll admit, so take my question with a grain of salt, because maybe you talked about this. I didn't watch the full thing. Maybe I probably should have waited to watch
Hmm?
the full thing before I asked, but I was curious for your thoughts on that.
I kind of forgot to miss the first part of your question there. When I think it's okay to do that, or like I kind of.
No, I mean, like, when you think it's like, because you were talking, let me think about, let me just think this through. Like, when you think in a book that stuff like racism and sexism is just being depicted in a way that feels authentic to the period, rather than just, you know, racism or sexism or homophobia that's like implicitly endorsed by the book, like something like, I don't know,
I think it
gore.
really depends on the case, right? It's kind of difficult to say that in like a general sense, right? It really depends on what the book is doing, whether it's whether it's something that is an actual topic of the book, whether the book makes say racism a theme, right? If if it's just casually racist by default, that feels different from it making racism a theme that it talks about either positively or negatively, right? You can have both. Um, and that's partly where I would say that's partly how I would make that kind of decision, or like that kind of judgment, is whether it's just something that is in sort of in the text but doesn't actually get talked about by the book. It's just the basic setup of the world that is depicted, or whether it kind of wrestles with the thing. But yeah, it's kind of difficult to do that without like an actual example, I think.
All right. Also, Colton, glad to hear that you're liking The Thicket. It's a really fun book. Um, I enjoy it. It's fun. Um, but yeah, you know, I just kind of was interested. I know you said it is kind of subjective for a lot of people, which it definitely is. You know, like, I mean, when you read a book in the set in the 1870s, you're like, yeah, you're kind of expecting some racism to show up in this story.
Yeah. Hello, the Demi-Drek has also entered the chat, and yes, Ori, Jin, and Biggest have explained it. But that's the thing. That's one of those slurs that, as a German, I just found out about like last year, because how would I, right? um, but yeah, no, the thing with the pirates is that it is racist, but it's racist about everyone. If you were looking for a lot of anti-Spanish racism, not Latine racism, but anti-Spanish racism, this is very much your book. Um, but
But like, how do you know if it's like if the racism is being like implicitly endorsed, or if the racism is like just part of who the characters are? I'm curious about that.
um, I mean, it kind of, you can tell that often, like I think in like ways when it's sort of like offhand, when it's just like casual assumptions that are just happening in a text, where you can see that it's kind of endorsed, right? If all the good guys are white and all the bad guys are black, um, that's I think a moment where, when it is written in this day and age, you can assume that it's at least tacitly endorsing racist ideas, because why would you do that otherwise? You don't have to, especially if it's like a fantasy book where you don't go like, well, I had to depict this in the historically correct ways. No, you don't. In a fantasy, you're doing that. I think it's something where you can. Let's use Dan Simmons for an example for a moment.
Okay. I've only read one Dan Simmons
Yeah,
book, so I won't be
about
offended. So I
yeah,
won't
no,
be
no, no, no.
offended by you
I'm,
explaining this.
I'm not even going deep into that. But like, for example, when you read Dan Simmons, you notice that, for example, he puts the Palestinians even in space. He turns Palestinians into refugees in the 30th century or whatever. And the question is like, why do you do that in a future that is so far in the future? Why do you think that any of the sort of like historical ethnic groups of our world do still exist? And if so, why do you pick this specific one and basically do the same thing to them that is already happening to them right now? It's like that speaks for like tacit endorsement of the status quo, because why would you do that otherwise? Because he's not doing anything with it afterwards, right? Except of course making sure that as soon as the central government fails, Palestinians explicitly, once again, the Muslims are turning against each other and fighting each other and falling back into barbarism, which once again, that's a narrative that Dan Simmons chose to do, and that speaks for Dan Simmons being a Islamophobe. Obviously, he got even more explicit about that in later books, and so forth. But that's what I mean by tacitly endorsing it, because you make story choices that are not necessary for any reason, but yeah, you don't even have to put explicit Palestinians into your 30th century sci-fi novel. You can just like leave them out if you don't care. But if you put them in just to make them, the bad guys, that speaks for a specific attitude of the author.
All right, I'll be right back. I'm gonna go to the bathroom real quick, but
Yeah, sure.
I'll I'll be right back.
Yeah, the Illuminatus trilogy does deliberately use a lot of shocking language. I mean, it does a lot of shocking things in general, right? Including writing something and then breaking the fourth wall and addressing the readers like, does this shock you? And I'm like, okay, clearly that's what you want to do there. So yeah, stick with that. Like, unless it makes you uncomfortable, but that's deliberate. They want you to be. I mean, it's part of Operation Mindfuck, right? That's the point. And hello, Drew. Yeah, I well, maybe I should read the ticket. I don't know. Well, Jin, well, when it comes to naming cats, I think there's a long and proud tradition of naming cats racist slurs, and Lovecraft was certainly a proponent of that specific strategy. And Ori, yeah, I think, yeah, that's the point. At the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily, what the author thinks doesn't really matter. That's part of the beautiful thing of Death of the Author. I don't need to know whether Dan Simmons personally, as a human being, is Islamophobic and hates Palestinians. I don't need to know that. But if in every book that he writes, that specific theme comes up, that is a negative thing. And the way it comes up is a negative thing, clearly, because it's, just in there to show us how barbaric Palestinians are. And that's maybe something to think about. Or maybe not, because clearly people want to read Dan Simmons. Which of the Octavia Butler books are you talking about, Aura? I assume it is Kindred, but I'm not. Or is it the vampire one? Is it Fledgling? One of those two, I guess. I think like the whole consent situation is an interesting one when you read older texts. So I just read, as I said, like I read Wizard of the Pigeons by Megan Lindholm, which is the other pen name of Robin Hobb, and there's scenes where consent is definitely undermined. She deals with it in an interesting way. First of all, it's a woman that does not accept, respect the man's consent, and it deals with that sort of like uncertainty and the feeling of hurt and so forth in, if your consent is not actually respected in a lot of ways. I found that interesting because it's a book from like the 1980s, and it has a very thoughtful approach because it also kind of showcases how a lot of times, these things are very situation dependent in a lot of ways, and people who are violating someone else's consent may not necessarily notice immediately what they are doing because they are so convinced that they're doing the right thing, and so forth, right? And that's, I found that one relatively very interesting in that regard. But obviously it's also like something that comes up with Robin Hobb a lot of times. I think like consent and so forth is something that she deals with a lot.
All right, I'm back.
Okay. All right.
I heard y'all talking about Octavia Butler. I read
Yes.
Kindred last year. It was fantastic.
Okay,
At least in my opinion.
I haven't read Dawn, so I don't know the scene there, or so I have no opinion on that. But I feel like consent is one of those things where discourse has moved rapidly in the last 20, 25, 30 years, and a lot of stuff that is older just deals with it very differently because, for example, when I went to school, like when we had, sex ed and all of that, we did not talk about consent. It just didn't never ever come up. It was just assumed that any, sexual encounters we would ever have would be consensual by definition. So that's what would the idea of asking for consent, the idea of that consent is something that matters, was just something that I, I did not learn in school, is what I'm saying. And I think the further back you go, the less you have that discourse in there in a lot of ways. And I think like even feminist writers were not necessarily I don't want to say not aware of it, but maybe lacked sort of like the language, unless you were like very active in, say, academic feminist discourse in a lot of ways. You have stuff like that just sort of like be sort of outside of like maybe lack the language in a lot of ways, a language that you can use in science fiction as well. Like that's just like me guessing here. Okay, I haven't read the Bloodchild collection either. I've only read, the parable ones. Earthseed, that's what it's called, Earthseed. Sorry, I'm not good with titles, sometimes at least.
Colton was saying he had some more Lansdale.
Yes.
I would recommend reading the Hap and Leonard books. I've only read the first 3 because that's what the TV show was based on. They're really fun, really good stuff.
Next, if you have read Hyperion, stopping after Hyperion, or what's the second one, Fall of Hyperion, I think is a good way to stop, because stuff gets only worse from there on out. That's the point. Like Hyperion is the high point in a lot of ways, and I agree. The world building can be interesting, and the characters can be interesting. He's not a bad writer. That's the problem.
he just irritates you. His
Mm,
smug aura mocks you, as some might say.
no, I think his fucking racism, misogyny, homophobia, and so forth piss me off. But when it comes to the technique and the technical skills of a writer, Dan Simmons is obviously good at what he knows how to use words. He just uses them for really bad things. But that's that's a different problem. His smugness, I don't know. He's not. I mean, he's also smug, but mostly he's just. He starts out being a self-important, arrogant bastard, and then turns into just a raving lunatic at the end with like books like Flashback. So it's a sad trajectory in a lot of ways.
I mean, I haven't read any of Butler's other books. Maybe I'll try some of them someday. But after reading Kindred, I'll try whatever she has.
That is very clever of Joe Walton. That is true. Um, yes, I think like yeah, especially stuff that is not heavily is still influenced by second wave feminism has a lot of that sometimes. I mean, you read Marion Zimmer Bradley, you read the Mist of Avalon, despite anything else. It also has some very questionable consent things happening in that book because it's also heavily influenced by second wave feminism, and that's just like
Um,
and that's just like in the book. That's outside of anything that Marion Zimmer Bradley herself did or allowed others to do.
well, I mean, I would push back a little bit. If you are going to create something, at least do well at creating something. You have to have a little bit of empathy. I think you can still have empathy and do bad things. You know.
Uh, yeah, yes and no, but I think that's kind of the point, right? Like Harry Potter is a good example there. I haven't read Harry Potter beyond book 3 because I I was too old, and I see no reason to go back now. But from what I can tell, Harry Potter is not the most empathetic book, and J.K. Rowling herself is clearly not a very empathetic person in any way, shape, or form, because the suffering of others just is. She doesn't care about the suffering of anyone, which is, why she's New Labour and highly neoliberal in a lot of ways, and why she does, hate trans people and allies with neo Nazis and all of the other stuff, and that's not something that you can tie in with a general empathy, which is what we've seen with the whole Trump and MAGA versus the fucking cardinal bishop. At the inauguration service, like, hey, maybe have empathy with all the people that you're treating like shit. So no, we hate you for this, for even suggesting that Christians should have empathy. So I would argue that yes, empathy is something that is lacking for a lot of people, and something that neoliberalism has very much tried to educate out of us. A lot of these things, right? Like when you look at like migration debates, so-called debates, people are talking about, the economic price of letting migrants in, all of these other things, but no one ever talks about the fact that if you have refugees, actual refugees from a civil war or whatever, right? The first idea should be, well, these people have a shit life right now. We should do our best within our means. We should do our fucking best to let them in and get them away from a fucking war zone. That's step one. That should be step one. Step one should not be, well, we don't have enough money to do this. That's not step one. If you think about money before you think about the suffering of people, you are already doing it wrong. And that's where empathy comes in. That's something that, as I said, like neoliberalism has certainly made very hard, done its best to sort of like not make people think empathetically in that regard. But yeah, so I think Dan Simmons is not a very empathetic author either. Um, doesn't sound like one. Well, I mean, that's why you need empathy and compassion, right? Those are two things. And empathy is putting yourself into the mind of another person, and compassion is the thing that you then do and go like, well, clearly that person has a shit situation. How can I make their world the best possible world? And you can withhold compassion for terrible people, sure, but empathy, I think, is more the skill of putting yourself into someone else's head. But it's sort of like a precondition for compassion. That's true. Hey, also, welcome back. So sorry, what you were saying, Britain, about empathy and authors. I didn't want to just like completely
Oh, I was just saying,
run over you.
it's kind of funny you say that about you know, J.K. Rowling, because like the big message of Harry Potter is that people are complicated, so maybe quit judging people and show compassion. And that's really ironic considering where J.K. Rowling has gone off the rails in recent years by not doing that. So it's just like, the fuck, man? What was that? Were you just blowing smoke up everyone's asses when you were doing that? But I digress. It's really,
Yeah,
people are weird, is what I've learned in my life.
I think like especially with Harry Potter, I feel the video that Sean, the leftist like YouTuber, the long, it's like an almost 2 hour video on Harry Potter, is a very very good overview of all the things that are wrong with Harry Potter and tying that into yes neoliberalism and other sort of like ideological underpinnings of the whole thing. I think it's in that regard a very good and fair and balanced book video. I mean, it doesn't end well for J.K. Rowling, of course, but that's kind of given at this point. But I mean that's like the other thing, right? If a book speaks to you in a specific situation as a reader because you feel seen, that or understood, that's a valuable thing. That's a valid thing, no matter all the other things. If you as a if a queer kid reads Harry Potter for the first time or read Harry Potter back then or any form of outsider kid and felt empowered by the fact that Harry Potter, gets out of the closet and all of that stuff. If that worked for you back then, that's fucking wonderful.
I guess I just don't understand like the cognitive dissonance
Mhm.
that J.K. Rowling must feel, because I don't get it at all, you know. And Daniel makes a good point, though. I'm not really a big fan of Orson Scott Card in general, even before all the weird Mormon homophobia stuff was out about him.
I haven't read any Orson Scott Card, so I don't know how often he puts the anti-gay stuff in the books and how often it's just his outside of the book statements.
I don't really think Ender's Game is really worth reading. And there's people who are like, "Oh, but Speaker of the Dead," and I'm like, dude, I have to read a mediocre book just to get to what's supposedly the great stuff. No thanks. I don't want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think like Ender's Game clearly was a highly influential sci-fi book. It did win a fucking Hugo Award, I think, or was it only Speak of the Dead that one? Like, it is big for a reason. It clearly has something that connects with a lot of readers in a lot of ways. So that's something that, like right, like once again, like if if a book makes you feel better and makes you feel valid and so forth, that is a good thing, period. No matter what else may be in that book, no matter what the author has said, if that works for us, for one human being, then in that situation that's a good book for that person, and that's fine. I don't know which one you mean, and I know he's also written something about parts of early Mormonism, about the life of Joseph Smith, I think, which I think he's technically related to. No, he's related to Brigham Young somehow. But then again, with like something like 60 wives and I don't know how many children. Just about everyone in Utah is probably related to Brigham Young in some way.
You know, it's just people are weird, is what I've learned, and
Yeah.
that's why I've just been like, fuck this. I'm gonna go over here and do my own thing. And people who like it, great, glad to hear it. People who don't, it's too bad. I wish more people watch my content, but like I said, I've grown, I've come to peace with the fact I'm probably gonna be like a cult booktuber.
See, for that reason alone, we should actually build a time machine and prevent Orson Scott Card from writing Ender's Game. Daniel.
No, hey, Ref, Jen was just saying, I
Yeah.
don't understand the love of Wheel of Time. All the books are like 15 pages of story, 700 pages of nothing, 15 pages of story. You wanna go in on Wheel of Time?
Nah. I've said everything I wanted to say about Wheel of Time in exhausting detail.
I was about to say, well, if you think that, you should watch Raf's videos about them. He really goes into it.
Yeah, Brigham Young. I mean, Brigham Young University is one of the universities in Utah, and Sanderson does teach there. And that's part of like the reason why there's a lot of sci-fi authors with a Mormon background, or genre fiction authors with a Mormon background, because he teaches that class on fantasy writing there. And before him, I think maybe Orson Scott Card taught it for a while. The other guy, whose name I always keep forgetting, taught there as well. The author of the Rune Lords series. I can't remember the name right now. David something. And so they've had like a class on science fiction and fantasy writing, and since that was taught by published fantasy and sci-fi authors, being in that class and doing creative writing probably makes it easier for you to break um, into publishing as an author, because you already have like professors and other people that are already in that industry, and knowing someone does make that stuff easier. And so you have this sort of like network of people around Brigham Young University that do genre fiction. And the thing is, of course, right, that that makes it, because most people going to Brigham Young University will be Mormons, because it is that much of a Mormon university in a lot of ways, and controlled by the church and everything. That means a lot of Mormons have it easier to break into fiction if they are, devout Mormons. And Mormons as a religion look out for each other, so it makes it even easier to break into that.
Yeah, but I don't think, like, aside from the ending, like, I think that Ender's Game is just mediocre science fiction, Just overall. It's just like, whoa, look at all these genius super kids. I'm like, who fucking, like, I don't give a shit about this. Like, it's digress. I digress about Ender's Game.
Yeah, Apollo. That obviously I totally understand that, and that's I guess partly why the backlash against Rowling was so strong, which then obviously led to all the stuff that we've seen of J.K. Rowling happening ever since, is that because of the way the narrative was done at the time. And I suspect Rowling just never thought about it when she was writing the first Harry Potter book. I'm not even sure if she thought about the symbolism of having Harry Potter live in the closet, right? I don't know if she did think that far, because she doesn't strike me as a very smart person in that regard. But Harry Potter clearly had a large queer audience at the time, because it did speak to so many people. And when she did turn out to be the person that she was, that did hurt a lot of people on a very, very, very visceral level, in a way that maybe some other authors public statements won't do, because you have that very specific connection. Because if you bond with a book, and that book is still very heavily tied to the author, you make yourself vulnerable by opening yourself to that book. You make yourself vulnerable to whatever comes afterwards in connection with that book. That's just like the same way that opening yourself to another person makes you vulnerable in a lot of ways. And that's maybe something we often underestimate in how accepting that we like a book because a book connects to us, or accepting that we that a piece of music, a movie, whatever works for us, we make ourselves vulnerable in a similar way than that we do when we, open up to people.
As you can tell, I get irritated by a lot of stuff.
Sorry, what did you say, Britton?
I was about to say I'm quite irritated by a lot of stuff. So,
Yeah. There's good bits here and there in Wheel of Time. They are spread thin, but there is good bits here and there.
I remember you were like, "Whoa, the cosmic horror is actually pretty good." Like I remember you saying that. But
Oh,
you're
so
kind of
Harriet was the editor for Harriet McDougall was the editor for Ender's Game as well. I wasn't aware of that. That explains the connection there. But the main thing with Harriet McDougall is that she clearly edited a lot of really good books. I mean, she was also the editor for the Black Company series, which makes it so baffling that as editor for Wheel of Time, she let slip so many terrible things, like let them slip through. So what are you irritated about by at the moment, Britton?
Oh, there's a lot of things that irritate me. Well, I was actually thinking about our conversation we kind of had last night before I went to sleep about
Oh,
that video you made, and you were just like, no one seems to care about individual books.
yeah.
And I'm like, well, except for the one, like the 10 ones, like
Mm.
mostly everyone else talks about. Care about that. That irritates me a little bit. A little bit.
Um, yeah, but I mean, I stand by what I said there. It's like I think we often underestimate how small the book community really is because we are very engaged in books, right? Like we think about books, we make content about books, we do all of that. We talk about books a lot. We are a very, very, very small number of people that do that. And that automatically means that there are, if you go past sort of like the most popular books, the number of people actually interested or in a book is minimal, and the number of people interested enough in a book that they not only read the book but also go and watch the videos about it, argue about it on a Discord server, do all of these things. That is even smaller. And if you pick something obscure, something old, because if you pick something that is currently out, people may have at least heard about it. But if you pick something that's like 40 years old, there's maybe like 500 people on the internet right now that are willing to talk about that book maximum, and they still need to find your specific content. And that's something that I feel we often underestimate because we do so much book stuff, and it's like, hey, why is no one doing that? It's like, well, because
I'm
no one has
trying,
read the
Ori.
book.
I'm trying. I'm also slowly reading some of the popular books and being like, damn it, they're actually pretty good,
Yeah, of course they are. I mean,
or at least I think they're pretty good. I know Raph doesn't like. I know, or at least Raph has issues with some of the like popular ones people tend to go to, like the First Law.
which one? The First Law?
The First Law, yeah.
I think the First Law is a pretty good series. I obviously have.
Well, I know you have a lot of. I know you have problems with it, like big problems with it.
I have, but basically, I have problems with most books up to a point, right? The question is like, how many problems do I have with them, and what irks me? Because there's only one perfect novel, and it has been written, and that's Winnie the Pooh, and nothing else will ever come close to that.
Fair enough. No, I mean, there's other things that irritate me.
Yeah.
But it's
Second,
more about the political state of my country. But that's not really gonna. People probably aren't really wanting to hear
Aura,
about that.
Aura, I think you're confusing Ender's Game with Ready Player One there.
Oh God!
Just guessing. I haven't read Ready Player One either, so I wouldn't know.
It's not very good. It sucks too because it has a lot of stuff that I like Rush references. I fucking love Rush. You bastard. It's pretty piss poor science fiction though.
I don't think you can post links that are not YouTube links in chat. I don't think even I can do that.
I mean, I made a video the other day about groupthink on BookTube, and I'm like, ah, shit. You know, I don't know if you're this way with your videos, but I'm really like critical of myself, and I'm like, ah, shit, I didn't say everything I wanted to say. Yeah, you know, drives me fucking crazy.
I'm very critical of all my videos, which is why I never watch them.
Fair enough. I don't watch a lot of mine either. But like, I'll stop recording them, and I'll be like, God, could have said more. You know.
Yeah, I mean the obviously you have the we all have the issue of listening to our own voice, which makes it already hard to do that, and you know.
Like I don't like it was kind of hard making that video because I was trying really hard not to like step on like booktubers' toes. Because like let me tell you, man, I'm the guy that like mostly everyone gets along with. Because like a lot of people on booktube just don't like each other. It's because like Amanda doesn't like Tori. Like a lot of people don't like Amanda. I get along with mostly everybody. So I have to like fucking tiptoe a lot. It can be frustrating. So that also irritates me a little bit. I just wish everyone would just get along. And mostly everyone does on BookTube gets along, but it's just like, good lord. You know, it's yeah, that's I don't want to make it about why are all these booktubers being mean to each other? You know, I don't
I
want to
think it
do
just
that.
happens. I mean, there's a performative aspect to that, of course, because if you, most of us on YouTube, sort of like exaggerate our personality. That's just like something that happens if you make content, right? It's like you have to be a bit larger than life because that's how you compress your personality into that small screen of a phone that someone is watching your video on. And if you exaggerate your personality or aspects of your personality, that obviously makes it, you know, increases the potential for conflict. And if you have conflict and you do
Like
it publicly, that
you
also
don't like Mike, you know? I'm just like, God damn. I mean, I don't really know Mike very well. I've only like emailed him a couple times, but I'm just like, fuck, man.
I think like see I th- th- so there's like two things, right? There's the question like of whether you get along with a person, and that's like one part, and the other part is whether you disagree with what they're doing. It's like there's probably booktubers I would not get along with if I ever had to, you know, hang out with them because we're just too different as personalities. But that's a different thing from me disagreeing with the content that a booktuber makes. And I try to only, when I speak publicly about booktubers, then I try to be then I try to do this exclusively about what they are doing in public, right? I don't want to,
Mm-hmm.
you know, go like, hey, they've been mean to me in a Discord message or anything of the sort. That's not something I want to put out there. That's doesn't belong out there. But if someone, you know, makes bad content or praises bad books, then I'm gonna talk about that and go like, hey, look, that guy's clearly bad at his job.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm gonna like, you know, I say I get along with everybody, and I try my best, but I did unsubscribe to Matt's fantasy book reviews the other day because I rewatched his Conan review, and I'm just like, this is one of the most baseless fucking reviews I've ever watched in my life. Just baseless. It was so just like I'm like, you know, I generally try to like, you know, I generally try to like, you know, calculate the odds. Like, am I, you know, I disagree with a lot of people. If I agree, to be fair, if I agreed with someone 100% of the time, like there's, you know, trouble. There's probably something wrong there, but like that review was done in such bad faith and it was just so like baseless. I just couldn't. I'm like I don't respect this at all, and I was like I'm done. Like I've never done that before, but it's really, and it's not me. It is maybe it is me being kind of like sensitive. That's like to, but like I don't know. I felt like it was just a really bad faith kind of review. And he acknowledged he didn't even read the whole thing. And I'm just like, dude, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
at least give the whole book a shot before you like it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. I'm sorry if I don't make sense here. I'm just
No,
kind
no,
of going off the
I
cuff
totally
here.
get it. I did not like that review either. I told him so. I was like, hey, this is this is bad. um, but
I do remember you thought it was kind of funny the last time we kind of talked about it.
it is funny in how bad it is, and that it's very easily like to spot how bad it is, and that's something I really enjoy. Matt's fantasy book reviews, Matt, that is. His videos, because he is very direct, and it's often it's a very different approach to making videos from mine, right? He reads a book, he closes the book and starts talking about it. He doesn't do any research, he doesn't do anything else. Whereas I try to sort of like have context for books that I talk about, and that's a very different approach. And I think both are valuable. If you want to have like someone totally not get a book because he doesn't know the context, because they don't know the context, they know anything about it. They just read the thing without ever thinking about it and go like, "Hey, this
like
is shit."
at least with Tori, she'll just go, "It wasn't for me." There are things I didn't like about it, but it wasn't for me. I can respect that. What I don't respect is him going like it was basically the most swarmy, like 21st century, you know,
Mm.
like type of review. And I'm just like, good lord, this dude just does not get it and is refusing to get it. Oh God. It was painful to watch. It was very painful to watch. Not just because he disliked something I liked, just because my God, he is getting it wrong.
Yeah, but you know, I say like I found it entertaining. I got angry at it. I spoke with him about it and go like, "Hey, this was not good. You missed all of these things," which is, you know, if you're reading older books, knowing the context is important more so than reading a book that is published in 2025, because you're living in that context. If you can read something from the 19th
It's like he
century,
doesn't it's like he didn't even give it a chance. Like it was so bad. Like it was such a bad review. Again, like it was such like a bad faith kind of review, and he's like, "Oh yeah, all the stories are the same." Yeah, they were written for a fucking pulp magazine. What did you expect? Like it was baffling. It's very baffling.
yeah, but like, I mean, as like at least it's entertaining, and he's mad at a book. I found I think like
So
a
like
lot of like book
you
reviews.
respect that he honestly got mad at it even though he
Yeah,
doesn't fucking understand it.
yeah, sure. I
It
find
doesn't irritate you that he just completely took it in bad faith.
it irritates me, but not that much. I'd rather have people be honestly mad about something, because they don't understand it or whatever. I'd rather have that than people making their spoiler-free reviews where they talk about stuff and just like pile this like they just like stack phrases one after upon the other that have like nothing. Like, yeah, it has a really good magic system, and the world building is fabulous, and it deals with themes of motherhood, and it does. And you're like, okay, so what's this book about? Because you're not saying anything. Because dealing with themes of motherhood could mean, you know, dealing with, you know, caring for someone, responsibility, could be about loss, could be about postpartum depression. You don't know, because you
He
just said it
must
deals
have
with a
really
theme of
triggered.
motherhood.
That review must have been real bad. It was. It was very bad. Like it was really. You know what, Raf? That's fine. I'm not gonna like. I don't want to. I don't ever want to seem like I'm telling people what to do. I am just saying. Here's what really irritates me. It's when people do bad faith reviews, as I like to call them, where they're not really wanting to give the book a chance. It irritates me to no end. That's what irritates me a lot. But aside
Yeah,
from that, like Matt Deadass said, like people like Lord of the Rings because of nostalgia, and I'm like,
yeah.
there are books and YouTube channels and articles that suggest differently. That was a stupid ass take. Now he does. I will give him credit. He did say this was his opinion, but nonetheless, it was a stupid ass opinion. So you know, I
Um,
digress. I digress.
Also, no, this is not Mike. It's
No, it's not
Matt.
Mike.
It's Matt from Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews, who does these very spontaneous angry books book reviews, which are, you know, entertaining to watch.
Yeah, no. I don't know why there isn't an old Conan movie with Arnold. It'd be pretty fun. I'd watch that movie.
I guess the
Um,
question is like the only person who could make that movie would be John Milius, and that's I guess off the table. So yeah,
Mike
that's why.
likes Conan, as far as I remember, because I remember watching an old video where he spoke pretty positively about the
Yeah,
original Conan. So,
Mike loves Conan. He doesn't get Conan, which is why he likes it, but that's a different thing.
so you're okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I don't think he. Yeah, I don't know. It's like I'm not like I don't want to pretend like Conan is like this super deep. It's not like Tolkien where it's like there's this big old mythology and real deep thing, but it's like I do think there is an artistry to Conan that a lot of people miss, and it just kind of
There's more depth in at least part of the Conan stories than most people give it credit for. But if you go and read Conan stories only because Conan is badass and kills a lot of people, then yeah, you can do that. But that's maybe liking it for the wrong reasons. Because if you like a character because he's a massive murderer, then what does that say about you? You really like people that kill people? Maybe you want to think about that,
also they're
right?
just fun adventures too. I mean, maybe it's that, and that's fine. You can like the Conan stories for being fun adventures, but I mean, I don't like them because Conan murders people.
I mean, that's what Conan does. Conan goes to some place,
Well, he
and
does
Conan
murder
gets
people,
mad
but
and kills people, or people get mad at Conan, then Conan kills people.
Matt left the server. Like, I hope that Matt on Books doesn't watch this and he's like, "Oh no, they're talking shit about me." No, we're talking about Matt's fantasy book reviews, or I am at least. Matt on Books is fine. You're doing fine. You're in your corner. You're doing okay, buddy.
That's a different. There's too many mats in BookTube. You constantly confuse the different mats.
So many Matts. I'll be right back. I'm gonna get a drink real quick. My throat's
Yeah.
kind of dry.
I was going to say something and then I replied to something and then I forgot what it was. But yeah, but I mean, that's the thing with Conan, right? I feel like the Conan stories do say a lot about Robert E. Howard's thoughts about society. They're very much the kind of story that a very depressed incel that has read too much and too little Nietzsche would come up with, and that is an interesting thing in itself, in a lot of ways. And the sort of like the depression, the um, uh, stuff that like leaks through the Conan stories. I think that's where they really shine. And not necessarily in the fact that he kills lots and lots and lots and lots of people, which you can witness in that whole series of Conan stories, the sort of the middle ones where you can just tell that they were written because he needed to make some money, and he very much follows like a formula. There's like 2 or 3 like Iron Shadows. It's called Iron Shadows or Iron Shadows in the Moon, something like that. There's 2 or 3 of them where Conan is, for whatever reason, ending up on some island somewhere in the Sea of Gilead, and then obviously pirates show up, and usually they have a woman prisoner, because we need to have that female character that gets more and more undressed. So we have a cover illustration, and then some weird supernatural monster shows up, and Conan kills everyone, and then him and the girl row away somewhere. I think, yeah, the Iron Shadows in the Moon, or just Shadows in the Moon. The Devil in Iron is another one of those. There's a whole like series of like 2, 3, 4, 5 stories that are basically the same thing. Technically, it's called the Black Pool or something. Is another one of those stories that is just that, and those are obviously not very deep. But if you read something like Across the Black River or the Red Nails, and go, well, this is cool because Conan kills a bunch of people. You're reading those stories wrong, because Conan doesn't do much it doesn't actually do that much in Across the Black River. It's mostly other
read
people.
like the Tower of the Elephant. Like, he doesn't really kill anybody. He's like trying to steal something.
Yeah, Tower of the Elephant is a really good book.
Or is
Really good
God of
story.
the, or is it God in the Bowl where he's trying to steal something? I don't remember. Maybe it's God in the Bowl. I don't.
They're both no, no. So God in the Bowl is the one where he's in there and gets caught, and then supposedly framed for murdering people that he didn't murder, and so forth.
Mm.
And Tower of the Elephant is the one where people tell him that no one has ever managed to go into the Tower of the Elephant, and he's like, "Fuck you! I'm gonna just show you." It's literally the no one has done this, and Conan goes, "Hold my beer," and and does the thing, which works really well because it's such an understandable sort of like motivation for an angry 19-year-old, right? It's like,
Well, not
yeah,
all of
fuck
them.
you.
Like there's a couple. Like if you read like the like first Del Rey, like you can kind of see him going through different stages of his life. Like there's one where he's a king. There's one where he's stealing stuff. There's one where he falls in love with this pirate chick who's pretty
Mm.
cool, and then he gets into a fight, and it's a lot of they're fun. They're fun adventures.
But that's the thing, like even the one that you just mentioned, like Queen of the Black Coast, does have some really like sort of like deeper themes. It also has like the most badass opening of any Conan
Oh my
story.
god, yeah, it's so good.
It's also like, so yeah, so my friend was accused and in front of the judge, and then the judge wanted me to basically rat him out. And this is like, seeing that he was clearly mad, I clove his skull, and then I fought my way out of the courtroom, and I'm like, this is so good. It's like, how can a judge not understand that I would not testify against my friend and then try to force me to do that? What an
Uh,
asshole.
so yeah, Conan isn't a snitch. Snitches get stitches, as the kids like to say.
Well, he's not a snitch. That's the point. That's the point. He's not a snitch. He decides to kill the judge instead.
Yeah, I like how it's just like you follow the ship crew, and then here comes Conan, just chilling.
The laziest one there is literally the one, the whatever of the Black Pool, which starts on that ship, and then suddenly Conan just like, it's a ship on the open ocean, and Conan just like swims through the ocean and just climbs on board of that ship. And then I'm like,
Like I'm part of the
that's
crew
your
now.
way of introducing your characters. Like, well, there's this dude just swimming through the ocean.
I haven't read Hour of the Dragon yet.
That's
Have
a
you?
Hour of the Dragon is the novel, the Conan novel that he basically cobbled together out of some bits and pieces, and it's good. I think it works best if you have already read other Conan stories, because it does. So the basic setup is Conan does something, Conan loses a battle, Conan ends up sort of losing his kingdom, and then he has to go on this long ass quest to basically restore his kingship, and become king again. And that quest, of course, means encountering a bunch of people. Sort of like confronting his past. You have all these situations where Conan goes like, "Well, I could also just, stay with these pirates who are now my friends and become a pirate again, because being king really sucks. It's hard work." And or like he does all of these things that he's done before. He basically goes back through all of these episodes, and that's obviously something that works better if you have read other Conan stories before.
I really like Joseph Reed's books video about Conan. He called him the greatest murder hobo who ever lived, which just
Who said
makes
that?
me. Joseph Reed's books.
Ah, okay.
It's he did a video about Conan. His thumbnail says greatest murder hobo of all time, which I thought was very funny.
Well, Murder Hobo is one of those like tabletop role playing game terms at this point, where people are like, well, basically every group of D&D adventurers back in the olden days was basically a group of murder hobos, and if you hadn't burned down your first orphanage after 3 adventures, you're doing it wrong.
I can't wait for you to read House of Chains when you get to it. I hope it's not that long, Colton, when I read House of Chains. Ugh. Yeah, no, a lot of people are like, Britton, I think you'll like Karsa Orlong, considering how much you like Conan. I'm like, you know what? Maybe. We'll see. I'll have to give it a crack.
Karsa Orlong is Steven Erikson doing a deconstruction on Conan.
Well, yeah, I know, but there's people who are like, hey, Britton, I think you'll like this riff on Conan. I'm like, all right, yeah, we'll give it a crack.
He's very Conan in that he's constantly annoyed when people talk too much and decides to just kill people instead because talking is boring, among other things. So yeah, um, and that's the thing, right? Mike from Mike's book reviews loved Karsa Orlong once again for the wrong reasons because he he already loved Conan for the wrong reasons, for just the killing.
Yeah. I haven't read any of those books. The what is it? The Dritz books,
Driz, the Dark Elf books.
The Elric knockoff.
Um, Driz doesn't do that much murder hoboing because he's obviously a good guy. So clearly he doesn't. He only murders people of ethnicities that are that make them evil by design. So he has to kill them, and it's totally fine if you murder orcs, trolls, um, goblins, all of that stuff. You can murder those without regret. It's very yeah.
Yeah, no, it's I don't know. Maybe it's just a me thing. No, it's like like with Tori, like Tori didn't like Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. I'm like, you know what? That's fine. Like I get how I get how it can turn away potential female readers because I'll admit the female characters aren't the best parts in those stories always, but it's been a while since I've read Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, so I'll have to go back to it
I think
at some point.
with Fafhrd and Grey Mouser, it does depend. I think Fafhrd and Grey Mouser it's complicated.
Mm.
I would argue that in some regards, it works really well. In like a story like what's it, The Greatest Thief in Langmar, Thieves in Langmar, for example, which is that story where both Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser are trying to sell those jewels, and they stole. It's the one that comes after Stardock if you read them in the chronological collection and not in publication order. And basically, because Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser think of themselves as super smart and kind of think of women as not as smart, and are also incredibly constantly controlled by their dicks. They obviously get robbed by those two women because, of course, they are, because they're fucking idiots. And you have a lot of those kind of situations where Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, because of their innate sexism, are definitely falling on their faces. So you have that, but it is, once again, because it is written in sort of like the idiom of the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, it does obviously read very different from something that you might expect today, and it uses language that can be disheartening and so forth. And
for sure. I mean, even Conan, there's a story when Conan is rescuing this lady from like this like black tribesman, and he goes, "It's my duty."
The Valley of the Lost Women. That and the Shadows
He's like,
in
"It
Zambaula.
is my right as a white man to save you." And I'm like, "Oh, dude,
Yeah.
no." It's like, that's not right.
Oh yeah, brown and Arab type humans are also definitely on the list of people that it's okay to murder without being evil in Drizztland.
Well, to be fair, a lot of them are like kidnapping people. But no, I mean, I'm not saying kill Arab people. Don't do that. Don't kill anybody. As far as unless it's like self defense. In that case, maybe you can kill people. Bex asked, "Did I do something different with my facial hair?" I don't think so. Does it look different? Yeah, it looks the same to me.
Yeah, it looks the same to me as well. But that's like one of those things. Like when I read the Driss books last year, that I reread the Driss books, like the part when he goes to the Kalimshan. It is the most Orientalist shit ever, and it's really bad in the way it describes these kind of people. So there is a lot of like racism baked into the law, that stuff. But partly that's also already in some of the source material, not in all of it, but in part of it, and that's obviously the problem when you write stories set in a setting that you have not actually, designed yourself. You're somewhat tied to the property, and then the demands that the owner of the intellectual property does in fact make on you, and you can't just make shit up. And if you're writing a story in a world that says brown people evil and you make them good and understandable, then you're probably not getting your book published. And in the 1980s, D&D was not very woke, possibly because Gary Gygax was a bit of a um,
Didn't he
racist.
join up with neo-Nazis, or was that someone else?
That's his grandson, I think. So his grandson
Oh,
is very deliberately sort of white supremacist, neo-Nazi kind of guy. The thing with Gary Gygax is that he did hold some sort of like, as far as I'm aware, he did hold some racist views, especially when it comes to sort of like eugenics adjacent things, right? Like bell curve adjacent things, where where he thought that people from specific ethnic backgrounds were innately more intelligent, which kind of explains how you come up with the, D&D rules where having a specific race gives you a bonus or a malus or a penalty on certain abilities and stats. It kind of explains why someone would think in those kind of ways, I guess.
yeah. I think the Scarlet Citadel would make a good Conan movie if they ever decide to make another one.
The Scarlet Citadel does work really
Yeah.
well. I mean, that's like the other thing that I find so interesting. Like, you have a bunch of stories where Conan is king in Aquilonia, and they all start with him being really not happy with his job as king, and then probably almost losing his kingship, and then, despite having complained about it before, I mean, pages and pages and pages of him complaining about how boring it is to be king, he then decides that yes, he has to go back and actually do the king thing, because it's his responsibility and it's his people, and it's his job to care for them, and yeah.
Better him than someone else. No, but I like um with some of these like Conan movies, I'm like, you got stories you can pull from, like
Yeah.
there's some that
Uh,
are more like you could like make an episode of like a television show or something, like the Frost Giant's Daughter, which is my favorite Conan story. Like you could easily turn that into like a 30-minute, episode. Though I guess it wouldn't be that interesting. It's him chasing a woman across the snowy mountain and killing some giants.
it's very existentialist in a lot of ways, where Conan is just like, all right, I'm horny, I'm gonna rape this woman, and there's nothing that can stop me, not even the fucking gods. And yeah, that's certainly one thing you can do with a story.
No, I mean, it
And
just kind of
yeah,
reminds me of I don't know, it's just the way it's written and just how it moves. It just reminded me of just how freaking weird it is. It reminds me of like an Edgar Allan Poe story, especially towards the end.
yeah,
He's like, "Oh, well, that was one of the things Matt was complaining about," and I'm like, "Bro, she's like a siren. Like, I'm not saying it was okay what Conan was doing, but it wasn't like the woman was just like, oh, and then Conan's like, I'm gonna have a piece of that ass. She was basically like, "Oh, come and get me," which look, that's not like I'm not saying like that's okay, but I'm like, you're missing some context there.
I yeah, of course, but the story, if you break it down, is still Conan decides to rape a woman, and the story is about how he's trying to do that. And Conan is supposed to be the hero there. Obviously, Conan is not a good guy, and that's never claimed that Conan is a good guy. He's just, someone who does what he feels like doing, and it's disturbing if you read it. But that's kind
I
of the
mean,
point, right? It is existentialist in that specific way, right?
it sucks, man. It sucks that that 2011 Conan movie tanked because man, Jason Momoa fucking looks like how Howard described Conan in the original stories. You know, unfortunate. But yeah, I hear you, Oso. It's they really want those like epic fantasy movies, and it's just like no, but it's just like no, I understand, Jen. I agree. Like trying to moralize Conan is kind of stupid because it's just like, look, like Conan is not a good guy by our standards. I don't even think he was a good guy at the standards of Robert E. Howard's time. You know, like, he was just like,
Yeah.
I'm just writing these fun stories. You know, he just does what he feels like. You know.
I think there's a little bit more to it, but there's certainly admiration in there that someone like Howard, living with a lot of like external constraints, has for people who don't have those constraints, and that's in there. That's, I think, why Conan speaks to so many people, is that a lot of us have been in that situation where if we had the choice, we would also just
Like, you could easily do like an
behead the fucking
animated.
judge, right?
Oh, like you could easily make like Ilmet and Lankmar into like an animated movie or something. Like, I'd watch it. Anyway, make sword and sorcery cool again is all I'm saying. And also, Matt's fantasy book reviews just doesn't freaking understand Conan whatsoever. So there's that.
Yeah, well, it is what it is.
Yeah, no.
I mean, I've read the Conan stories a lot of times, and I do get different things out of them whenever I go back to them. And there's certainly a lot of stuff in there where I'm like, yeah, the fact that I found that
Are
specific
there a
bit
couple
really
where you're
good
like,
when I was
ooh, that
15.
didn't age well?
Yes, and in particular, the fact that I found that specific part of the story really cool when I was 15 says a lot of things about me as a 15-year-old, and they are not necessarily flattering.
Well, I hope you weren't chasing women hoping that you could, have your way with them after they. I hope you weren't chasing women across snowy mountains,
Luckily, we don't have that kind of snow, so I didn't have to do that.
Well, that's that. I don't know if that's good or not, but he's the bald one, the bald one, who, like, I don't know. And he also had the audacity to go like, oh, well, you can read them for like historical context. I'm like, that's not the only fucking reason they're good. They're good because they're also fun fucking adventures. All right, so shut up, Matt. Damn you. But no, it's
Yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. The Mike Mignola,
Oh my god, yeah, that would be
Falcon and
great.
Grey Mouser.
I still didn't read that, but I've seen his illustrations of Fafhrd and the Grey Mouse, and I'm like, yes. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
No, man, it's Raph was hacking down people with his sword. Somehow I can see that. I can see Raph pulling out his giant, like, berserk gut sword and just slicing through his enemies and hearing the lamentations of their women.
Yeah, that's definitely what I did when I was 15. Not just saying, like, I think like the problem with a lot of these kind of stories, which are obviously wish fulfillment on behalf of all Robert E. Howard, at least in part, and partly they're obviously just writing to market, is of course that if it's wish fulfillment for someone who is sort of out there on the in the incel sphere or manosphere, which is totally where Robert E. Howard would be today, right? Those stories can be wish fulfillment for a lot of people who are at least susceptible to those kind of ideas. And you can read Conan and become a very angry misogynist. That's totally in the cards if you read Conan and then take the wrong turn. And that's
I don't know what it says about me that the Frost Giant's daughter is my favorite Conan story, but I don't know. Just I remember being at the ending and I was like, "Whoa, that was freaking awesome!" So well told there. Well played, Robert E. Howard.
Speaking of, I do have an axe, Ida. It's my favorite axe. I bought it in the castle in Ghent, Ghent in Belgium, and €5 well spent, I would say. I can even use it to open beers with.
Me, I'd probably be more like Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, just trying to survive and blundering their way into getting goodies. Though I don't chase tail as much as Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser do.
Colton, that does sound very Broker's Helm, what you're describing there. I don't know if you know the band Broker's Helm, but if not, you should totally check them out. They have, it's on their first album, I think, on Into Battle. The song Into Battle is literally a song about riding dragons and killing people with the amazing sound of your electric guitar. It's very 80s. It's really good.
That sounds very 80s. Destroying dragons with the sound of guitar.
Yeah, Broker's Helm, amazing band. I've seen them a couple of times, and it's always highly entertaining as a live band as well. It's just really, really cool shit. Which is probably why at least one of their songs even made it into Brutal Legend. No, it's just a small wooden axe for children with a small bit of fur even on the top. It's a children's toy I bought in the castle in Ghent.
I was much too shy to be a tail chaser.
Yeah.
I would just be like, hey, hi, and she would just like look at me like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Like, I'm
Oh yeah, right. That also happens. People of the Black Circle is an interesting one because People of the Black Circle does have a for Robert E. Howard, at least, very strong female protagonist in it.
like, I'll admit, like, I'm not saying like Conan is like this perfect book that's ever been made. Like, sometimes it does, the stories do drag a little bit. But
yeah, that's because Conan the Barbarian is not Winnie the Pooh.
Well, no, but I mean, I haven't read Winnie the Pooh, but I'll concur that point. It's like, I don't know. Another rude slang I don't understand. It just means like you're really attracted to women and you want women to bang you.
Yeah,
you're trying to bang women, I should say, not women banging you. That then she's gonna go like, "What's banging?" I'll be like, "God damn it, it's having sex."
I think we're good with that one.
I think we've corrupted Ida enough.
But yeah, so yeah. I think it's also like very much an American.
Yeah, us Yankees are just
British one.
It's like it's fun. Raph was just talking about that one where he randomly swims up to the pirate ship.
Yeah, I mentioned that earlier. That is the something of the Black Pool, where they end up on that island and all the pirates eat the magic fruits and fall asleep and then get taken by the weird alien people who are also somehow black, which seems to be important, and then get thrown into that magic pool that turns them into these small statues, and then Conan saves the girl, and that's that. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Also, the beginning where you just like, so how can I introduce my hero? Well, I'll just let him swim up to to the ship, and where is that ship? It's not in a harbor. No, it's somewhere in the open fucking ocean. But that's like the other thing, right? If you read "A Witch Shall Be Born," is another one of those where like Conan only shows up in in like the second part of the story. He isn't even there in the first part of the story. It's like, okay, that's that's certainly a way to make a Conan story. But I mean, that's also the one where Conan gets crucified. So and then kills a vulture with his teeth. Well, the Tower of the Elephant, I think, is really good because it is incredibly straightforward, right? You have the Tower of the Elephant is just like Conan goes, well, you told me I can't do this, so watch me. And then it does have that sort of like a melancholy in there that a lot of Conan stories do in fact have when you find out what's actually going on with the elephant's heart and all of that. And Conan does, I guess technically he kills the wizard, but that's more or less it, right? but he does so because he helps the elephant being to die and be thus free and no longer be the prisoner of the wizard, of the evil wizard. So yeah, it's really good. It's a really good story. It also works really well as like a your basic dungeon crawl for like a first level tabletop adventure, because you can just like have that with that tower there, and like you have these different like things that he has to overcome as a thief. You have the I'm spoiling like a a very old story here, right? But you have the thing that you have to climb over the wall, and then you have to get away from the fucking lions that are sort of like the guard beasts in the garden. And then I have to climb up to the thing, and then you have the weird spider monster on top of the story, out of the tower, and all these bits and pieces. You can just like run that basically from just the tabletop, just from the short story. Although Mongoose Publishing did in fact do a stats and so forth for their Conan role-playing game for Tower of the Elephant.
Too much of a goofball to be Fafr and the Grey Mouser, though they are pretty goofy. So, I mean, maybe I would fit in well with them.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't read Melancholy Elephants, but yeah. No, I think like a lot of the early and a lot of the very late Conan stories are good. It's sort of like the stuff in the middle that's a bit of a problem. The Devil in Iron, the Shadows in the Moonlight one, Zuthal of the Dusk with that woman whipping woman scene that is so infamous. That one. There's a couple more that I just can't remember right now which one they are, because they are all sort of the same. Where usually the plot is Conan is somewhere for whatever reason, he's alone, usually about to die because either everyone else got killed or he had to run away or whatever, and then he meets scantily clad woman, and they find ruins in which some eldritch horror will confront them, and then the story is over. And that's just not a very good sort of like plot line. But if you read something like Rogues in the House, for example, that's a really clever story with like everyone wanting to kill that fucking priest. And now he does some clever bits in that one when you find out that the priest is already dead, because or not dead, but knocked out by the giant ape that killed him, that knocked him out, and all of that stuff, right? There's clever bits in those stories, I think. The same with the God in the Bowl, right? When everyone is
I like that
in
they're
that
all.
house.
Is God in the bowl where they're all just standing around and arguing, and then they find the like eldritch being in the bowl, or is that
Yes.
Tower of the Elephant?
No, that's God in the Bowl when they're all in there,
I
and
remember really liking that story because it's
and
just people arguing the whole time, and it's just like this is great.
yeah, because everyone is in that temple where they shouldn't be, because everyone is trying to do something else. Conan just wanted to steal something. The owner of the thing wanted to do basically also steal something. There's like 3 or 4 people all in there that shouldn't be there, and all arguing with each other and trying to get one over the others. And it's just like really clever. But at the end, Conan goes in, kills the monster, and that's that. But it's
Colton asks, what are good sword and sorcery recommendations that aren't Fafr and the Grey Mouse or Conan or Elric? I would recommend Kagan the Damned. I do have some issues with it, particularly with how it shows the old trope of, oh, look, they're raping all the women. Look at how evil they all are. But it's pretty fun. I enjoy it. It's also has some like eldritch cosmic horror Lovecraft stuff in there. It's really fun that I really like. So
I would definitely recommend Clark Ashton Smith. He has like a bunch of stuff in different sort of like worlds. The Hyperborea stuff by Clark Ashton Smith is incredibly fun. He's also very funny. He has like a level of irony that is closer to Fafhrd and Grey Mouser than to Conan. Definitely Clark Ashton Smith. I would also recommend C.L. Moore's Jirel of Joiry, which is the one woman writer that got published in Weird Tales, and it's this medieval French noblewoman who also, goes into these other worlds and kills people with swords and stuff. It's really cool.
Also, I would say the broken sword, though that's kind of like a weird amalgam of like sword and sorcery and fairy tales and like uh just wrote a review of it recently. What the hell am I freaking talking about? And Norse
Um,
myth, of course. There's if you're a Norse nut like I am, you'll have a lot of fun with it.
yeah. I think another one that I would probably recommend is Michael Shea's Nift the Lean, which is really cool. It's very Jack Vancian in a lot of ways. So technically, I guess the Dying Earth stuff by Jack Vance could count as sword and sorcery adjacent. Then there's Carl Edward Wagner's what's it? The Kane stories, and I guess Imaro gets sometimes put into the sword and sorcery category as well, which is going to get a re-release this year. That is by, I need to look up the name because I constantly forget the
Also,
name.
Gentlemen of the Road, even though I mean there's no sorcery in it, but it's sword and sorcery. Like, get out of here. Like it's sword and sorcery. Just there's not a lot of sorcery in it. It's a
Yes,
lot of fun.
Gorel of Goliris, Gorel and the Pot-Bellied God and the other Gorel stories, definitely really cool by Lavi Tidar. Although it's not just swords and sorcery, it's also guns and frog sex, which it all makes sense. It's really good. There's obviously more stuff, and Gentleman of the Road is definitely a really good sword and sorcery story in that it doesn't have any sorcery, but it's very Fafet and Grey Mouser adjacent as a historical fiction, basically.
I wish he'd do more with that because I remember reading it and I had fun with it, but I don't know if I was fully like my head was in it, but I liked the conceit of it.
I like that all the Vikings are incredibly scurvied and alcoholics, and basically are all at, at the absolute end of their health because they've gone the whole fucking Varangian way all the way through the Black Sea and to Byzantium and back. Uh,
Also, Colton, if you don't mind comics, Hillbilly is very good by Eric Powell. Hillbilly. It's basically like Southern Gothic Conan. It's a lot of fun. I've only read the first volume, but I
okay.
loved it. Also, some of the like early Witcher stories kind of fall in that kind of sword and sorcery, except it kind of like sword and sorcery meets fairy tale. So,
Yeah, I think yeah, Clark Ashton Smith, C.L. Moore. That's like some of the classics that I feel are worthwhile in a lot of ways. And Niftaline is, yeah, if you like Jack Vance and enjoy the very very specific sort of like style of Jack Vance, of a very elaborate kind of prose style, like Jack Vance is beyond purple. That's deep purple prose, to put it mildly. But also, it's about insulting people in very complex sentences where they only realize that they have been insulted like 3 weeks later.
I still need to read Clark Ashton Smith, man. I have that Penguin book that they made because St. Joshi. I have my gripes
Mhm.
with the man, but that man is also a hero because he is keeping early fantasy alive, really, and supernatural horror for that matter.
Mhm. Yeah, no. But I've made a mistake of looking at the time. We've been going for like 3 hours at this point. Britain, you came like in like half a, a bit over an hour ago, I guess. But I think I would probably slowly end this because I should probably get some sleep. And
Probably a good idea, Raph.
yeah, because I'll be doing my breakfast tea drinking and writing and whatever sprints tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. That is in 9 hours. So you know, and then we can talk more about service magicians and how I'm going to tie them into organized crime in New York.
All right, I'm curious to hear how this will go.
It'll work. I'm sure it'll work. Also, if you are someone who has an interest in American history, if you have never heard of the Battle of Blair Mountain, you might want to check that one out and learn about it. It's that one time the United States decided to drop bombs of some of their own citizens in fucking West Virginia.
Oh shit.
Turns out West Virginia coal mine owners did not like it when their people were striking, and they sent in the fucking army.
Yeah, I don't like those communists, I guess. And Mother Jones was involved in it. All right.
Yeah, Mother Jones was involved in the whole thing, in the Battle of Blair Mountain. It's a huge ass thing that does not necessarily get talked about a lot in American history classes. Yes, they machine gunned them and they dropped bombs on them, like literally with airplanes and everything, because it's like 1920s. Yes, it's that one. But like 1920s and 30s labor and general like history in America is one of those really interesting things. If you've never heard about the business plot, you might want to check that one out as well. And the bonus army and all of that stuff. Wild times.
I still need to read Amber because Roger Zelazny is one of my kind of blind spots as a fantasy reader.
Amber is fun. I highly recommend Amber. I'm
Well,
very
Matt
happy
didn't
that you.
like.
I'm very happy that you said that there, Apollo. I really enjoyed it. Oh, earlier today, I read Mike Stackpole, really cool fantasy author and one of the people that worked on the Tunnels and Trolls roleplay game, posted on Blue Sky. Groundhogs are just beavers that don't own waterside property, which made me very happy. So yeah. Thanks everybody for hanging out. Thanks for coming on, Britton. I hope you had an interesting evening on a Sunday or a Monday morning for you, like Kale and other people potentially in the Australias and New Zealands and all of those places. Yeah, I had fun.
Well, I'm glad I showed up, and it's always fun hanging out, Ref. You always come with some interesting opinions.
Oh yeah, that's one that I also want to read. I met him like at the German games. Like there's the board game fair, the convention, the Spiel in Essen, and back when what's his name? Who he passed away a couple of years ago. The owner of Flying Buffalo Games. Flying Buffalo always had like a huge like booth there where they sold a lot of old Tunnels and Trolls stuff and dice, lots of dice and Grim Tooth Trap stuff and Mike Stackpole sometimes was working there on the booth as well, together with the other guy whose name I really should remember because he was super nice and super cool. But Zelazny is just like all over the place, which makes Zelazny so interesting. All right. Yeah, I think yeah, and what's face Robert Evans with Behind the Bastards also talked about the Battle of Blair Mountain in one of the Behind the Bastards episodes, I think. Oh yeah, right. I remember that with the Philadelphia thing. That's also also insane.
I am thinking about getting that big book of Amber.
I do that.
Anyway, glad to be here. I don't want to hold you hostage there, Ref.
Now I get sidetracked by the chat.
Get
As
some
always,
my friend.
Yeah, I mean, I usually went to Spiel for the role playing game stuff, not so much for the board game stuff. But I've also obviously bought the insane Cthulhu. Is it called Cthulhu Wars thing? I bought that there. Holy shit, that's the most massive board game I own. All right, everybody. Have a safe evening and good start to the week and everything. And I'll talk to most of you somewhere very soon, I guess. So, see ya.